I paid for my sister's entire $75,000 wedding. Then she shoved me through the service entrance into a back room because my wheelchair would ruin her perfect photos. So I canceled every single check the morning after. The invitation was in my hand when she picked up. I'd been staring at it for 4 minutes. Cream cardstock, engraved lettering, Naomi Claire Hargrove and Devin Ashford Pruitt request the honor of your presence. Beautiful thing, honestly. I remember thinking whoever designed it had real taste. Then I flipped it over to the little insert card that listed the table assignment, table 19. I figured it was a typo. Figured there'd been some kind of clerical mix-up with the venue. The whole event was enormous. 240 guests, a country club in Westchester, a 10-piece band. Easy enough to scramble numbers on a seating chart that size. So I called laughing. I said, "Naomi, I think there's a mistake on my invite." She picked up on the second ring. Her voice had that careful tone she gets when she already knows something is wrong, and she's bracing for the conversation she knows is coming. Not surprised. Bracing. She went quiet. Not a, "What do you mean?" Quiet. I was wondering when you'd call about this." Quiet. I stopped laughing. She said Devin had done the seating chart himself. She said she was sure he just wanted to make sure I was comfortable. She said the auxiliary room was very nice, very well appointed, and that it would actually be easier for me because of the bathroom proximity. She said she was sorry she hadn't called to explain it ahead of time. She said it really wasn't a big deal. I asked her what table number was in the auxiliary room. She said 19. I asked who else was at table 19. She mumbled. Couldn't quite hear her. I asked again. She said there was a co-worker Devin wasn't close to, some plus ones who didn't know anyone, and she actually said these words, "Our cousin Marcus, who has autism and might make noise during the speeches." So that was table 19. The co-worker nobody liked, the strangers, the cousin who might embarrass someone, and me, the reject table, hidden in a side room off the main hall, accessible through the venue's service entrance. Because Devin didn't want my wheelchair in the wedding photos. I said okay. I said I understood. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. Just told her I had to go and that I'd see her at the wedding. Then I sat in my apartment for a while and did the math on what I'd already paid. The number was $75,000. I've been in a wheelchair since I was 12 years old. The accident happened on a Thursday evening in late June. My sister Naomi was graduating 8th grade, which at our school was a bigger deal than it sounds. There was a ceremony, a dinner, the whole production. She was 12 going on 13, me 14 going on 15. Our parents were taking us out afterward to her favorite restaurant, an Italian place called Caruso's on Route 9 that we only went to on special occasions. I remember she was wearing a white dress with small blue flowers on it. I remember she had her hair done. She was sitting beside me in the back seat. The other driver ran the intersection at 55 miles per hour. He had a blood alcohol level of 19. He hit us on my side. I threw myself across Naomi before impact. Reflex. Nothing calculated about it. I just did it. She walked away without a scratch. I didn't walk again. 2 surgeries. 11 months of inpatient rehab at Helen Hayes Hospital in West Haverstraw, New York. I was 12 years old and I was learning how to exist in a body that no longer worked the way it used to, in a facility 40 minutes from home, while my sister went back to school and started high school and grew up at a normal pace. I'm not saying that to generate sympathy. I'm saying it because it's the context for everything that followed. Our parents were good people who did their best with a genuinely impossible situation. My mother came to Helen Hayes every day for the first 3 months. My father took the later shifts. Naomi visited on weekends. She'd sit beside my bed and do her homework, and we'd watch TV together, and it was almost normal. I loved her. I want to be clear about that. She was my little sister, and I loved her. And the accident happened through no fault of either of ours, and I never blamed her. Not for a second. Not once in the 22 years between that Thursday evening and the morning I canceled those checks. I came home in the spring. Adapted. That's what you do. Wheelchair accessible apartment, modified car, modified routines. I was stubborn in the ways that turned out useful. I threw myself into school because school didn't require legs. I was good at numbers. Always had been. By 24, I had my CPA. By 27, I'd started Hargrove Financial Group out of a 2-bedroom apartment in White Plains. 1 employee, 1 desk, 1 client who was a family friend's landscaping business. By the time Naomi called me about the wedding, I was 36. I had 11 full-time employees. My client roster included 3 professional athletes, 2 former athletes with significant investment portfolios, and a minor entertainment company doing about $8 million a year. The apartment in White Plains was long gone. I had a 2-floor unit in a converted loft building in Tarrytown with a roof deck and a proper accessible build-out I'd paid for myself. I had, over the years, paid off Naomi's student loans. She'd gone to SUNY Purchase for fine arts, which I thought was brave, and when she graduated with $31,000 in debt at 22 and a job at a graphic design firm making $36,000 a year, I just paid it off. Didn't tell her I was going to. Just called the servicer and did it. She cried on the phone, thanked me for 20 minutes, said she didn't know how she'd ever make it up to me. I said there was nothing to make up. That's just what family does. When our parents died, dad from a stroke in 2019, mom from complications following a fall in 2021, both within 2 years of each other, I covered every expense. Funeral costs, estate administration, the sale of the house, all of it. I did it partly because I could and partly because I wanted Naomi to be able to grieve without worrying about logistics. She was close to mom in ways I wasn't anymore, just by virtue of proximity and circumstance. I thought it was the right thing to do. She met Devin in the spring of 2022. He was 38, from a family in Greenwich that had made money in commercial real estate 2 generations back and spent 30 years slowly converting it into social capital and personal brand. He was an event planner, not a small-scale one. His firm did corporate retreats, high-profile private events, once a gallery opening that got written up in a lifestyle magazine I'd heard of. He was polished, charming in a way that worked from a distance. I noticed, the first time I met him, that he maintained eye contact with everyone in a room except me. He'd asked, that first time, if I could switch to a regular chair for photos. Said it so casually, like it was a reasonable aesthetic preference, like I was choosing the wheelchair, like I might not have considered whether a piece of carbon fiber medical equipment might not match the vibe of whatever his Instagram looked like that week. I let it slide, smiled, said I'd look into it. I told Naomi about it afterward. She laughed it off, said he just didn't know what to say around disability, said he meant well, said he'd get used to it. I filed it away in the category of things to watch. He didn't get used to it. Over the next few months before the wedding planning started in earnest, there were small incidents. A dinner reservation he'd made for a restaurant with 3 steps at the entrance, no ramp, no accessible option. He expressed surprise when I pointed it out, which I didn't believe. A comment at a family gathering about whether I'd considered an electric scooter instead of a manual chair because it would be less clinical looking. A habit of speaking about me in the third person while I was present, directing questions about my dietary preferences or my schedule to Naomi, as if I weren't in the room and capable of answering. Each thing, individually, was deniable. Together, they formed a pattern. I was inconvenient. I was visual clutter. I was an element in a composition that Devin was always trying to arrange to his satisfaction, and I wouldn't arrange. Naomi didn't see it. Or she saw it and didn't want to name it. She was in love. She was happy. I understood that. So I kept showing up and I kept filing things away, and I told myself that once they were married and settled, things would normalize. Then came the call 8 months before the wedding. She called on a Wednesday afternoon in late September. I could hear the controlled panic in her voice before she'd finished her first sentence. She and Devin had done their budget projection. They'd booked the country club in Westchester, Whitmore Hills, which I knew by reputation as the kind of venue that charges $40 per person for a dinner roll. They'd hired the 10-piece band, locked in the 7-course meal from a caterer Devin used professionally, confirmed the premium open bar, ordered invitations, sent the save the dates to 240 people. Devin's parents had promised to cover the bulk of the costs. $250,000, Naomi said. That was what they'd pledged at a family dinner in July. That was the number Devin's father had said, apparently with the confidence of a man who has never not had money. His parents had since revised their position. There had been some kind of internal disagreement about a real estate deal that had gone sideways. The money wasn't coming. The wedding was fully booked. The invitations were already sent. The vendors required deposits. The venue required a non-refundable commitment. Could I help? I asked how much they needed. She said, hesitating, $75,000. I said I'd send a check that afternoon. She cried, said I was the best sibling anyone could ask for, said she didn't deserve me, said it meant everything. I told her to stop, that I was happy to do it, that it was my gift to them. I wrote the check to Naomi directly and noted on the memo line wedding gift, which I wrote partly out of habit and partly, though I didn't consciously think this at the time, because I was an accountant and I had an instinct for documentation. Devin called me the following day. He was warm, noticeably warmer than he had ever been, said he wanted me to know how grateful he was, how much it meant, how he hoped we could build a real relationship, started including me in wedding planning calls, sent me progress updates. I thought we were finally connecting. I thought the money had somehow unlocked something genuine. I want to say in retrospect that I understood what was happening, but I didn't. Not fully. I wanted to believe in the better version of the story, where Devin just needed time to come around, where Naomi's happiness was safe in his hands, where the family I'd spent my whole adult life maintaining was going to be okay. The seating chart arrived 6 weeks before the wedding. My invitation arrived 12 days after that. Table 19. I've already told you about the phone call. What I haven't told you is everything that ran through my head between hanging up that call and pulling into the country club parking lot 3 weeks later. I almost called her back multiple times. I drafted 3 different texts. I wrote and deleted a long email laying out, carefully and without accusation, why the auxiliary room arrangement was not acceptable and what I thought it communicated about how Devin viewed me. I deleted all of it. I kept coming back to the same wall. She already knew. I hadn't told her anything she didn't know. She'd gone quiet immediately. She'd had her explanation ready. She wasn't surprised because she'd already been through this internal conversation and reached whatever conclusion allowed her to keep the peace with Devin. I needed to see it. I needed to actually sit at table 19 in the auxiliary room through the service entrance and know with my own eyes and body exactly what it felt like. Not for her sake, for mine, because I wanted no ambiguity. I wore a navy suit. I had it pressed at the tailor I'd used for 12 years. I wore the cufflinks my father had left me. I arrived at Whitmore Hills Country Club at 4:15 p.m. on a Saturday in late October, 45 minutes before the ceremony started, in the same wheelchair I've used every day since I was 14. The venue was beautiful. Flagstone terraces, manicured grounds going copper and amber in the fall light, a main hall with vaulted ceilings and tall windows. I could see why Devin had wanted it. I checked in at the welcome table, found my name on the card. Table 19, auxiliary room. A teenage teenage staff member led me, with the professionally blank expression of someone who had been coached on this exact situation, down a side corridor I hadn't noticed near the catering station, through a set of double doors marked Staff and Vendor Access, and into a carpeted side room about the size of a large conference room. I sat there for a moment and took stock. The main tables I'd glimpsed through the hall had white linen, real linen, heavy and pressed. The tables in the auxiliary room had plastic tablecloths, white plastic, the kind you get at a party supply store. There were 8 folding chairs around each table. The main hall had centerpieces I'd seen in the planning photos, white peonies and garden roses in low glass vessels with gold accents. The auxiliary room had no centerpieces, just bare plastic tablecloths under slightly harsh fluorescent lighting. A small speaker mounted near the ceiling would carry audio from the main hall. It crackled when I tested it. The service entrance door was directly behind me, solid metal. Through it, I could hear faintly the kitchen noise from the catering preparation area. During the ceremony itself, before the reception began, Devin had arranged for a chair to be left open in the 3rd row of the ceremony space, front of house, visible for appearances. I had been shown there by a coordinator and sat for about 90 seconds before one of Devin's people appeared beside me and murmured, with professional smoothness, that there was a wonderful spot in the back row that would be easier for my chair if I preferred it, and wasn't the sightline just as good from there? I didn't move to the back row. I stayed in the 3rd row. I watched my sister walk down the aisle in a gown that cost, I knew from the planning calls, $4,000. She was radiant. She was genuinely, incandescently happy. And I thought, she looks like herself, the girl in the white dress with small blue flowers, the girl in the back seat, the girl I threw myself in front of without thinking. After the ceremony, there was a cocktail hour on the terrace. I attended. No one from Devin's family spoke to me, which was not unusual. Some of Naomi's friends came over and we talked. Then the main reception began, and I wheeled myself through the staff and vendor access door and sat down at table 19 with the plastic tablecloth. Marcus was there, my cousin with autism, who was 31 years old and a software engineer, and sat quietly eating his bread and not making noise at anyone. The coworker Devin didn't like was there, a woman named Keelan, who turned out to be funny and sharp, and we talked for 40 minutes about the commercial real estate market in Westchester County. There was a +1 named Tom, who'd driven 3 hours and seemed bewildered about why he was in a side room. Good people. All of them. None of them deserved this. I stayed for 1 hour. I watched the muffled light under the door to the main hall. I listened to the crackling speaker carry the first dance song. Then I said goodnight to Keelan and Marcus and Tom, wheeled back through the staff and vendor access door, found my car in the parking lot, and drove home. I called my attorney Sterling from the parking lot before I left him a voicemail, told him I needed 15 minutes the following morning to discuss something. He called at 8:47 Sunday morning. I explained the situation, the gift, the check, the timing of the cancellation. Sterling is methodical and thorough and has been my attorney for 9 years. He asked me 3 questions, then was quiet for about 30 seconds. Then he said we needed to talk about something else before I made any moves. I said, go ahead. He said he'd received a call 6 weeks ago from a colleague at another firm. The colleague was representing a creditor in a civil matter. Devin's name had come up. Specifically, Devin's firm had a judgment against it, a civil judgment from a prior event contract dispute filed in Westchester County for approximately $41,000. The judgment was 8 months old and unpaid. Sterling's colleague had called because the creditor was trying to locate assets, and my name had come up in connection with Devin's, presumably because I was known to have financial involvement with the wedding, and the creditor was looking for any information about recent transfers of money. Sterling had flagged it and waited to see if I'd bring it up myself. I hadn't, because I hadn't known. I asked if there was more. There was. The same colleague had, through the course of normal discovery work in the civil matter, found a second financial issue. Devin's firm had been operating for the past 14 months under a deferred operating agreement with 2 silent partners who had a recovery clause. The recovery clause allowed them to claw back invested capital if the firm's gross revenue dropped below a certain threshold in any 2 consecutive quarters. Revenue had dropped. The partners had initiated the clawback. The amount at issue was approximately $90,000. Devin's parents hadn't just had a falling out over a bad real estate deal. Devin's firm was insolvent. His parents had known. The $250,000 wedding pledge had been made before they knew the full extent of it, and when they found out, they'd quietly pulled back. Devin had known about his firm's financial situation, at minimum, since early summer, months before he and Naomi had come to me. My $75,000 had not replaced the contribution from parents who had unexpectedly hit a snag. It had replaced a contribution that Devin already knew was never going to arrive. He'd known his firm was underwater. He'd known his parents were out. He'd known the wedding was unfundable. And rather than scale back or postpone or tell the truth to my sister, he'd held on and waited, and when the crisis arrived, he'd let Naomi make the call to me. And then he'd put me at table 19. I sat with that for a moment. Just the information, sitting in my chest, getting heavier. I called my bank at 9 a.m. on Monday morning. I instructed them to issue stop payments on the checks I had written in connection with the wedding. The primary check to Naomi for $75,000 and 3 smaller supplemental checks I'd written directly to the country club, the caterer, and the band as deposits when the planning bills had come in and Naomi had been short. Total canceled, $78,400. The country club called Naomi at 11 a.m. Monday. The check had bounced. announced. They were using the word fraud. They required payment in full within 48 hours, or they would pursue legal remedies. Their outstanding amount was the largest single item. The venue booking, catering deposit, bar deposit combined came to just over $51,000. The band called by noon. Their remaining balance was $8,500. The caterer called at 12:40. Their outstanding balance was $11,200. The florist called at 2 p.m. Naomi had given them a check on my behalf for the flower arrangements, $4,800, and I had confirmed I was covering it. That one bounced too. Another $4,800 now in dispute. By 3 p.m. Monday, Naomi had 4 vendors threatening legal action, a country club using the word fraud, and approximately $75,000 in personal liability that had not existed 72 hours earlier. She called 17 times between noon and 4 p.m. I did not answer. She drove to my office at 4:15. My building has a front desk with security. They called up. I told them I was unavailable. She said it was a family emergency. They told her they understood, but their instructions were that I was unavailable. She sat in the lobby. I learned later from my assistant Rena that Naomi sat in the lobby of my building for 6 hours. She didn't leave at 5 when most people cleared out. She was still there at 7. Rena stayed late, ostensibly finishing reports, actually because she was worried about what I was going to walk into when I went downstairs. I went down at 8:15. Naomi had been in that lobby for 4 hours. She was sitting in one of the low chairs near the entrance with her coat still on. When she saw me come off the elevator, she stood up fast, like a reflex. Her face was white, not pale. White, like the color had simply been withdrawn. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying, but she wasn't crying now. She looked like someone running entirely on adrenaline and cortisol, and the particular desperate focus of someone who has been sitting with a catastrophe for 8 hours and hasn't found a way out of it. She said my name. I stopped about 5 feet from her. The security desk was occupied. There were 2 people from an evening cleaning crew near the elevators. Nobody was pretending not to watch. I let her talk first. She said it was a misunderstanding. She said the auxiliary room was genuinely the most accessible option at the venue. She said Devin had asked about it specifically because he wanted to make sure I was comfortable. She said the country club was threatening them. The vendors were threatening them. They'd have to pay it back, but they just needed time. Needed me to reinstate the checks. Just temporarily, they would pay me back every dollar. Her voice stayed controlled. She was holding herself together with great deliberate effort. I waited until she was finished. I said, Naomi, did you think it was okay? She looked at me. I said, you took $75,000 from me, and then you put me in a back room off the service entrance with a plastic tablecloth. You put me there with the people Devin wanted to hide. Did you think that was okay? She looked at the floor. She said Devin had been under so much pressure. Said his parents backing out had devastated him. Said he was just trying to get through the day and make things beautiful, and sometimes he made decisions under stress that he wouldn't make otherwise. Said he didn't mean anything by it. Said she knew it looked bad. I listened to all of it. Then I said, you never once said it was wrong. You're explaining it. You're not saying it was wrong. She didn't say it was wrong. She grabbed the handle of my wheelchair, physically reached out and grabbed it, which is something I have told her not to do for 20 years. It is my mobility device and my autonomy, and grabbing it without asking is not a small thing, and leaned in close and said, please, just please. They would lose everything. The vendors would sue. Their credit would be destroyed. They'd just gotten married. Please. I said, let go of my chair. She let go. I said, I gave you a gift. When you chose to hide me from your wedding like I was something to be ashamed of, I took it back. That's where we are. The security supervisor had appeared. He stood about 15 feet away, watching, not intervening yet, just present. Naomi said she couldn't believe I was doing this. Said I was punishing her for something Devin did. Said she had no part in the seating chart. Said she'd found out and tried to talk to him and couldn't change his mind. I said, you found out, and you didn't call me. She didn't answer. I said, you found out and you let me show up. You let me go through that door. She started crying then. Really crying. Not the controlled version from before. I felt something give, somewhere in my chest. Not softening toward reversing the decision. Something else. The grief of it. 24 years. The accident, and the hospital, and the student loans, and the funerals, and the planning calls, and the check, and the staff, and vendor access door, and the plastic tablecloth, and the crackling speaker, and the fact that she'd known, had known, and let me go through it anyway. The security supervisor guided her gently, but firmly, toward the exit. She kept looking back at me, not angry anymore. Something else on her face. Something I didn't have a word for. I went upstairs. From the 7th floor window, I could see her car in the side lot. She sat in it for a long time, not moving. Head in her hands, or maybe just forward, I couldn't tell from that height. It was dark, and the lot lights were on, and I stood at the window for a while. Devin called my office line at 8:30 the following morning. I let it go to the main desk and had Rena take a message. The message was, screaming, call back immediately, lawyers, ruining lives, jealousy, couldn't stand seeing other people happy. The usual architecture of someone who has been caught in something and decided aggression is the best remaining strategy. I did not call back. I called Sterling instead. Sterling had already heard from the country club's legal team. Their position was that because I had represented to the vendors, verbally, in confirmation calls, that I was covering the costs, and because I had backed out after services had been substantially rendered, they had a colorable claim. Sterling said colorable, which means possible, not probable. He said what mattered was that the gift was a gift, documented as such on the check check memo, made to Naomi personally, with no contractual obligation attached. I had canceled before the full balance was due. The deposits, some of them, had already been applied. Those were likely unrecoverable. The outstanding balances, the larger ones, the ones that could actually destroy someone financially, were legally theirs and Devon's to cover. I asked Sterling about Devon's financial situation. He confirmed what he'd already told me, and added that in the 72 hours since the calls started going out, 2 of the vendors had done their own due diligence. Devon's firm's judgment was a matter of public record in Westchester County. The band's manager had found it that same afternoon. The country club's legal team had found it by Tuesday morning. Nobody was feeling generous. There was one more thing, Sterling said. He paused. The kind of pause he uses when the thing he's about to say is significant. He said Naomi had called his office Monday evening. She'd asked to speak with him in confidence, not as my attorney, but as a neutral party who might help mediate. He'd declined, obviously, conflict of interest. But before he'd ended the call, she'd told him something. She'd said that Devon had told her, 2 weeks before the wedding, that I would be seated in the auxiliary room. She'd confronted him. He'd told her the venue's accessibility team had recommended it. She'd believed him. Then, 3 days before the wedding, she'd spoken to the venue's event coordinator directly about something unrelated, and the coordinator had mentioned the auxiliary room arrangement, and Naomi had asked specifically whether it had been accessibility-driven or a seating preference. The coordinator said it had been a specific request from Devon. He had asked that I be placed there. He had given the reason as a guest with mobility needs who required additional space and proximity to accessible facilities. The coordinator had taken it at face value. Naomi had known for 3 days before the wedding that Devon had lied to her about the reason. She'd confronted him again. He'd escalated. Said it was his wedding too. Said he had a right to have things the way he wanted them. Said it was one day. Said if I loved her, I'd understand that this was about more than a seating chart. This was about his professional reputation and the photos and the perception of the event, and that surely I, of all people, would understand wanting one day to look exactly the way you needed it to look. She'd let it go. She'd made a choice, and she'd let it go. And she hadn't called me. Sterling said she'd been crying on the phone when she told him. He said it wasn't his place to weigh in on the family dynamics, but he wanted me to have the full picture. I thanked him and hung up. I sat at my desk for a while, not working, just sitting. The financial consequences for Naomi and Devon spread out over the following weeks in the predictable, merciless way that financial consequences do when you have no liquidity. The country club came to a settlement, reduced amount, payment plan, but a substantial one. The caterer pursued their claim and got a judgment. The band accepted a partial payment after 6 weeks of back and forth, considerably less than what was owed, which the band manager told me later was because he decided they weren't going to collect the rest regardless, and he preferred to close the account. The florist never got paid and eventually wrote it off. Devon's personal credit was compromised by the existing judgment from his firm. Naomi's credit was affected by the wedding vendor judgments. They couldn't immediately qualify for the apartment they'd been looking at in White Plains, a 2-bedroom in a building I happened to know, a building with excellent accessibility because I'd toured it 2 years prior for a client. The thing about Devon's firm turned out to be worse than Sterling had initially indicated. The silent partners had completed their clawback by November. The firm technically still existed on paper but had no operating capital and 1 remaining employee. Devon had been quietly trying to restructure a partnership with another events company, and that deal fell through in December when the other company's due diligence team found the judgment. I found all of this out not from Naomi but from Sterling, and from public records, and from 2 people in my industry who knew people who knew Devon. Naomi and I didn't speak for 4 months. The first contact came in February. Not a call. A letter, handwritten, sent to my home address. 7 pages. I read it twice. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask me to fix anything. She wrote about the accident, about what she remembered of the hospital, about a specific afternoon in October when she was 13, and she had come to Helen Hayes and I had been having a terrible day, and she had sat with me for 4 hours and not said much, and how she had thought about that day often over the years. She wrote that she had spent the months since the wedding trying to understand how she had gotten to the place where she stood in the lobby of my building, and asked me to reinstate a check after what had happened. She wrote that she had no defense for it. She wrote that she had known about the seating arrangement 3 days before the wedding, and she had not called me, and that was the thing she was most ashamed of. Not the arrangement itself, which had been Devon's choice, but her own silence. The choice she made 3 days in a row to not pick up the phone. She wrote that she was in therapy. She wrote that she and Devon were in couples counseling, though she acknowledged she didn't know what that was going to produce. She wrote that she loved me, and that she had allowed herself to minimize what that meant in the interest of managing Devon's comfort, and that she understood if I couldn't forgive her. She wrote, "You covered me with your body. You have covered me every way possible since then. I let someone make you go through the service entrance, and I said, okay. I said, okay. That is what I have to live with." I read that line several times. I didn't call her immediately. I thought about it for 2 weeks. Then I called. We talked for 2.5 hours. I told her about what Sterling had found regarding Devon's finances, which she already knew some of and didn't know all of. I told her about the seating chart conversation from the venue coordinator's perspective. She already knew that too. She'd had the full conversation with the coordinator herself after the wedding, apparently, when she was trying to piece together the sequence of events. She'd confronted Devon with the documentation, and he had eventually confirmed it. I asked her where things stood with them. She said said she didn't know. She said they were working on it, but she was clear-eyed in a way she hadn't been before. She said she didn't know what that clarity was going to produce. I said I didn't want to tell her what to do. She said she knew that. We didn't resolve anything in that call, but we talked. That was something. The vendors, for what it's worth, were professional and not unkind. Keelan, the woman from the coworker table who I'd talked to in the auxiliary room, sent me a note 3 weeks after the wedding. She said she'd heard through mutual contacts about what had happened. She said she'd had the best conversation she'd had at a wedding in years. She said she hoped things worked out. Marcus sent me a text that just said, "Thought you handled it well." That meant a lot. I'm writing this now on a Tuesday morning in March, about 5 months out from the wedding. My office is the same office it's always been. Same window, same view of the river. I have a meeting at 11 with a client who plays for a team in the Northeast and wants to discuss his portfolio rebalancing. My life is fine. My life was always fine. That is not the point. The point is the service entrance door. There's a moment that stays with me. Not the lobby confrontation, not the canceled checks, not the phone call with Sterling about the finances. A specific moment in the auxiliary room at table 19, after I'd first sat down and taken stock of the plastic tablecloth and the crackling speaker and the metal service door behind me, before Keelan arrived, before Marcus. Just me, alone at a folding table in a side room while the real event happened 20 feet away, audible but muffled, a version of the wedding I was adjacent to but not part of. I was 14 when I threw myself in front of my sister. I didn't calculate it, didn't weigh the costs, just moved. She was 22 when I paid off her loans, 29 and 31 when I covered 2 funerals without being asked, 34 when she called panicking and I wrote a check for $75,000 the same day and wrote wedding gift in the memo, and didn't negotiate any terms because I didn't think I needed to. I've spent 22 years being my sister's safety net. I didn't do it for credit. I didn't do it expecting reciprocity. I did it because she was my sister, and because I loved her, and because covering the people you love felt like the most natural thing in the world to me. But love doesn't require you to accept being hidden. That's what I know now. That's the thing that took 45 minutes in a side room with a plastic tablecloth to finally understand. You can love someone deeply and genuinely and still draw a line. The line doesn't unmake the love. It just tells the truth about what you're willing to be. I am not something to be managed around. I am not a visual problem. I am not a guest who gets routed through the service entrance and set up in the back room with a crackling speaker so that the photographs come out clean. I canceled $75,000 worth of checks the morning after my sister's wedding. I would do it again. And some part of me, the part that sat in a hospital at 14 and decided it was going to build something worth building, that part is still not sure whether the thing I'm most at peace with is the cancellation or the choice I made 22 years ago that started all of this. Because I would make that choice again too, without hesitation. That's the strange thing at the center of all of it. I threw myself across her, and I'd throw myself again. I just don't think that means I have to go through the service entrance.